Hey everyone, welcome back to the Suburban Homesteader. In this video, we're going to be preserving our tomato harvest. So this is only some of the tomatoes, there's a ton more out there. This is probably the harvest over the last week or so that I've been storing in the fridge. I did a bit of a tally up. It's about 9.5 kilos worth of tomatoes. Some are green tomatoes because they come off the plant a bit too soon. I'm probably looking at maybe trying to do like maybe a green tomato relish with those ones if I have enough. Haven't done it before, but the rest of them I'm gonna sort them all out, see if there's any bad ones. I'm gonna be de-seeding them, and then I'm looking at maybe making, I was looking over through some of my books, and I was looking at maybe doing a pizza sauce and maybe marinara and have a look at freezing it to store it. So let's get started. So first off, I need to wash all these tomatoes before I do anything. Alright, all the tummies are washed, and now I just got to sort through them. I'll cut them and de-seed them, and there's a huge bowl there, so it's going to take a while to get through. Alright, so I've got my spent bowl where I'll be de-seeding but also getting rid of any of the bad tomatoes. I'm going to be putting all the good cut up ones in this one. And then I've got this little one to capture any of the green tomatoes, just to keep them a bit separate. So I'll be doing something a bit different with them. So the tomatoes here are a collection of different varieties of aromas. You've got large ones and small ones. You've got some San Marzanos. You've also got the Granny's Throwing Apple, which is a Performea bruiser, I think it is. So there's a couple of different varieties here that I'll be utilising and preserving today. So I normally just cut it open to see if there's any bad stuff in it, whether it's a bad spots or any caterpillar like pupae. So that's what happens when they're homegrown and organic, is that you share them with other things. So this is a pretty tedious process, but that's what you end up with. I know some people, look at the shape of that one, that's the Granny's Throwing Apple. I know some people tend to like boil their tomatoes or something like that to get the skin off. Now I find that definitely the smaller tomatoes, they have less likelihood of being damaged by like caterpillars and stuff, so they're less likely to have any pests inside. But sometimes they do succumb to like the stink bugs. The stink bugs are a bit of a sapsucker, so it can make some discoloration, but it doesn't really affect the tomato itself. Just looks a bit odd. This one's got a bit of a spot on it, maybe by a caterpillar, but the rest of it looks pretty good, so I'm just going to chuck that out. So that one's a bit of a bad one. Some bad discoloration on the inside, so I'm going to bin that one. And give my knife a bit of a wash. So I'm not even halfway through, and I'm going to be having a look at storing this in some Ziploc bags until I'm ready. So previously when I've harvested tomatoes, you know, whether I'm ready to use them then and there, otherwise I tend to store them in a Ziploc bag and put them in the freezer until I'm ready. So in the moment, I'm just going to put all this in here first, and then I'll keep sorting through the tomatoes. There's a ton here that I need to sort through. And like I said, I'm looking at doing a few different recipes with these. But these ones are already been sorted, cut and de-seeded. Like this bag alone is 1.6 kilos. So 1.6 kilos, and I've got all these tomatoes. All these tomatoes to still sort. Alright, so then we finally have it. All the tomatoes are prepped. I've got 3 huge bags full of the red tomatoes, and I've got a smaller bag of the green tomatoes. So you can also see from these bags that, you know, there was quite a lot that went in the to be composted bowl. A couple of bad tomatoes, and obviously all the seeds. The bad tomatoes I find tend to be the bigger tomatoes, especially with the more ripe they are. A lot of it was fruit fly damage. So I tend to find the smaller. So a lot of these, it took me ages because they're smaller tomatoes. Like I said, whereas a lot of my bigger ones had been damaged. So we've still got loads of tomatoes out there. But in the meantime, this is going to go out in the compost, and these are going to go out in the freezer. I really love the winter tomato sauce in Sally Wire's book. It has a really nice kick to it. But I was looking at maybe doing something a bit different. I pulled out my Freeze Fresh book by Schmidt, and I was having a look at maybe trying her marinara and maybe the pizza sauce to freeze for future use. So depending on how much I end up using, I might also do a third recipe. But otherwise, I'm going to be storing these in the freezer tonight, just so they don't go bad in the fridge, because I've already de-seeded them and they're quite moist in the bag. So I'm going to store them in the freezer, and then I'm going to have a look at maybe trying some of the recipes out tomorrow, so stay tuned. Alright, so back to the next day, looking at doing a recipe with these tomatoes. I've decided to use, like I said, the Freeze Fresh book. I've used this for like tips on how to freeze some of the harvest that I've picked from the garden, but I've actually never used one of the recipes before. So I'm going to be doing the Italian inspired marinara sauce. I'm going to be using our own homegrown garlic. This is one of the 2 Australian white garlic bulbs that I have. So you need the garlic, some extra virgin olive oil. You need some, obviously, tomatoes. It says 8 pounds, I think the equivalent's about 3.6 kilos. So I think I've got about nearly 4 kilos there that I froze overnight. You need some sea salt, dried oregano. It says crushed red pepper. I don't know if I'll use that. And then also some fresh basil, which I'll chuck in right near the end. But it will need to simmer for 2 hours. So I'm going to get it started. We won't be having it for dinner tonight. But, you know, I'm going to be putting it in the freezer for another night. Alright, so the recipe calls for 1/3 cup of sliced garlic, which is a little bit more than that. About 3.6 kilos of tomatoes, 3 tablespoons of olive oil, and 1 teaspoon of dried oregano, which was given to us from 5th Avenue Katoomba Retreat up in the Blue Mountains. And we've also got the crushed pepper that we're not going to use, the chili, and we've also got some fresh basil, about 2 tablespoons of basil, which I'll pick fresh right near the end, and about a teaspoon of sea salt. So let's get it all on. So 3.6 kilos tomatoes, the big pot. So let's get it turned on. So adding the garlic. because I ended up freezing the tomatoes, I probably should have left them just as they were. But they're only really lightly frozen. It might take a little bit longer. Tomatoes in. Cook that a little bit, wait for the tomatoes to defrost a little bit more, cook down a little bit for about 20, maybe 30 minutes, and then I'll start adding in the rest of the ingredients. So I'm just going to let it simmer without the lid on. It might just take a little bit longer because they were frozen. So it's a little watery. I'm hoping with a bit of simmering time that will reduce it a lot more. Now I'm going to add in all the other ingredients and let it simmer for another 2 hours. Alright, so this is a half a teaspoon. I need to put 1 teaspoon of sea salt. This is Himalayan salt. And 1 teaspoon of dried oregano. So the idea is to let it simmer for 2 hours and it should reduce. And then I'm then going to put it in the blender and blend it. So with all the tomato skins and everything, like it should blend down and hopefully make it a bit thicker as well. But it's a really basic recipe. I'm interested to see what it's like. Been about 2 hours. It's definitely reduced quite a fair bit. Now it's time to add in the freshly harvested and finely chopped basil. Now you need about 2 tablespoons of this. I think I've harvested way more, but that's okay. Now I'm going to take it off the heat. And just then stir in the basil a bit more.
I can't get it. I can't get it.
Alright, so it's off the heat now. I've popped the lid on and I'm going to let it cool down enough so I can put it in the blender and give it a bit of a blend. And that way I have a bit more of a finer consistency. Alright everyone, so it has cooled. And it has thickened up. It has reduced as per the instructions by more than half. So now I'm going to be putting it in this blender and then blitzing it. Probably in batches. I don't know if I'll be able to put the whole thing in. I'll be freezing it for another night. Alright. Make sure it's on tight. Give another quick stir. With a ladle. Another little taste test. So I'm quite happy with that consistency. Very nice. Alright. that's about 1 litre of sauce, just in this one. Fill up the next. That'd be very risky or very successful. So I've got 1 litre. This was 2 litres, but I'm going to be putting a bit more in this one. I think this is just way too much sauce in this. It can take up to 2 litres, but I might put a bit more in this container here, and I'm going to gift it on so someone else can use it. That's enough for one person. I'll give it to my mum.
It's pretty good. Just need some seafood.
So there we have it, 1 recipe down with our homegrown tomatoes and a homegrown garlic, Italian-inspired marinara sauce. So I'm coming back to the book Freeze Fresh from Crystal Schmidt for the pizza sauce. So it's a roasted cherry tomato pizza sauce. I'm not going to be just using cherry tomatoes, I'm just going to be using all the tomatoes I have. And of course I'm going to be using fresh tomatoes. So I'm just going to be doing some quick prep of some tomatoes that I've just harvested for this recipe. For this recipe, it required a bit more tomatoes than I had that was fresh. I probably could have harvested more, but I just couldn't be bothered. So I'm just using what I have. So it does require 12 cups of de-seeded tomatoes. Like I said, I'm not just using cherry tomatoes. I'm using all the different ones I've had growing. And it needed 12 cups, but I'm only doing 8 cups. That's what I had. So I'm just going to be amending the recipe slightly, but still keeping everything else relatively the same. So I'm just spreading out the de-seeded and chopped tomatoes over 2 lined oven trays, just using some baking paper underneath, and I'm just making sure that I'm spreading them out quite evenly for even cooking, even baking. It does need a little bit of drizzle of olive oil over both trays, and then I'm going to be whacking it in the oven about 180 degrees for about 90 minutes. But you still want to keep checking on it near the end. So here I am, just pulling it out. It was a little bit less than 90 that I ended up doing, but this looked quite good, so I was quite happy with it. The recipe is really simple. I was quite surprised. It's so simple. Cooking the tomatoes is probably the most time-consuming thing out of all of it. So we're going to be using our own homegrown garlic. So I've just chopped it up. It's about 1 tablespoon fresh garlic that the recipe calls for. I put more in. I love garlic. This is our dehydrated parsley. So we dehydrated this on a previous video. The recipe calls for about 2 teaspoons of dried parsley. We're also going to be using some homegrown dehydrated oregano that was gifted to us by 5th Avenue Katoomba Retreat. This is about 1 tablespoon. Obviously, this is what the recipe calls for. You can always make your own modifications. This is some rosemary that I had dried previously. This is from our own garden. It's about 1/2 teaspoon of the rosemary. So this is the only thing that it hasn't been, homegrown or dehydrated on our homestead. So this is just bought onion powder. Hadn't got around to doing any dehydrating of onions to make our own powder yet. So this is just store-bought onion powder. It's about about one teaspoon, sorry. Also using some Himalayan salt. Does say sea salt, but I had Himalayan salt on hand. It's about 1.5 teaspoons. I just eyeballed it with my own fingers. We're also going to be using some lemon. So I use fresh lemon. The recipe didn't really say whether you do fresh or pre-bought lemon juice, but it's about 3 tablespoons. So I just had, this is, again, isn't our homegrown lemons. This is store-bought lemons. Our lemons aren't ripe yet. Otherwise I would have used our own homegrown lemons. But like I said, about 3 tablespoons. It's up to you whether you want to use the, you cut lemons and you juice it yourself, whether you buy pre-bought lemon juice. Now with the basil, I haven't got around to dehydrating any of our basil yet. It's probably something I should try and experiment of soon. So I just went out the back and I just picked some fresh basil. So the recipe does call for 2 teaspoons of dried basil, but I just used our fresh basil. About 1 tablespoon or so of olive oil in the blender as well. And lastly, now adding our tomatoes. So I'm just going to whack them in the blender. Like I said, they've been cooking just under about 90 minutes. The recipe did say about 90, so whether or not you wanted to let them go a little bit longer or not, but they started to cook really well, so I was quite happy with how they were. I just didn't really want them to burn. So I'll just, in goes the 2 trays of tomatoes. Like I said, it is 8 cups of tomatoes rather than the 12. I don't think I could actually fit any more tomatoes on the trays. Maybe I need to get bigger trays. I do have a 900 oven, so maybe I'll have a look at getting some bigger trays, or maybe just doing a couple of batches of cooked tomatoes and just waiting for it to cool. So I'm just whacking it all in the blender and putting it on our Kenwood mixer. So this is just a separate attachment that I've got that I use for blending. It started to blend really well, but then it started having issues, so I don't know whether or not I didn't put the bottom on properly enough or what the case was, but it just stopped actually blending. So I ended up taking it off and pulling out our good old trusty baby NutriBullet that we've had for about 4 or 5 years. So I just whacked it in. I had to do a couple of I think maybe 2 batches. Now this also is a bit sketchy with the blending, so I don't know if it's right or not because of the motor, but I shake it to try and get it an even blend. So I'm just shaking it to blend it all up. But look at that, it's great consistency, tastes amazing. So I'm just going to be putting it in this little jar here. It doesn't all fit in that jar, but I had decided to actually make some pizzas, homemade pizzas for dinner tonight. So I'm actually going to be using this straight away. But otherwise, you could store it in a jar. You can maybe store it in some containers for freezing and use it for a later time. But I'm just going to be using it straight away. So I ended up making a homemade bases, a really simple recipe. Only 4 ingredients, water, flour, salt, and a little bit of olive oil. So you do pre-cook the pizza bases to a nice brown golden colour. And I'm just using the pizza sauce that we literally just made straight on these pizza bases. I'm just doing a tester for the kids. They just prefer like a margarita pizza. So I'm just doing a quick little one for them to share. While spreading, it does feel like a bit more of a thicker sauce compared to if you would buy like a store-bought pizza sauce. But maybe that was because I only used 8 cups of tomatoes rather than the full 12. I want to try this recipe again, so I might even try doing the full 12 cups, but just having to modify how I cook them itself. So I'm just going to be adding some store-bought cheese. So we're just using our mozzarella cheese on top. So all up, I did do a big batch of pizza bases, so we ended up doing about 12 pizzas, some for later uses and lunch the next day. So I ended up making about 12 pizzas with the pizza sauce that we made. So here is the end result, and of course a bit of mum tax, had to give it a try, and it tasted really great. So I'm definitely going to be repeating this recipe. So lastly is my favourite winter tomato sauce by Sally Wire's Complete Preserves book. She does 2 different types of tomato sauces, but this one is just amazing and has a great kick to it. So I've done this one before. This is probably the 3rd or 4th time that I've done this one. I've only ever done this recipe with my own homegrown tomatoes, but you can definitely do store-bought. You can even do tinned tomatoes. But with the great thing with this one is that they can be frozen. So I've previously prepped these tomatoes another day, and I've just kept them in the freezer. So I've de-seeded them, I've chopped them, left them in a Ziploc bag in the freezer, and I've literally just pulled them out ready to go for this recipe. So I'm just doing a bit more preparation for this recipe. It does call for 2 brown onions. I'm just giving them a quick dice. It also calls for 1 cooking apple. Now in the past I've just used whatever apple I've had on hand, but this time I actually had a Granny Smith, so I just quickly peeled that and I've chopped that up as well. The recipe also calls for 2 garlic cloves. I'm just using some pre-minced and frozen garlic that I've done before, that I've left in ice cube trays. It also needs, you also need curry and mustard and some white vinegar and some salt. Now this recipe does also require 500 grams of sugar. It doesn't necessarily indicate which type of sugar, so I normally like particulars. Previously I've done brown sugar. I didn't quite have enough this time around, so I've actually just used white sugar for this recipe, and about 2 kilos of the frozen tomatoes. Now I'm just preheating my stovetop. You could give the pan or the pot a little bit of a drizzle of olive oil. I'm just using a bit of spray of olive oil just so, you know, when I chuck the onion and apple in first, it just won't burn too quickly. So I'm just putting the apple and the onion and the garlic in just to pre-cook a little bit before I put all the other ingredients in the pot as well. Now I'm just going to be putting in the tomatoes. They are quite frozen still. Some of them are starting to slowly break away. But you do need to make sure that you have a pot big enough to put all the tomatoes in as well. You don't want to make the mistake that I did the first time when I did this recipe and I just didn't have a big enough pot. So I'm just going to be splitting the bag open and chucking them all in. Like I said, it does require 2 kilos. I have a little bit more than 2 kilos here, so I will just take a little bit out. But it won't be too much that I'll be omitting from this recipe. You will need about 3 dessert spoons of salt. I'm using Himalayan salt here just because I have what I have on hand. But you can use sea salt or whatever else that you have. It is also 3 teaspoons of mustard powder, and there's also about 2 teaspoons of curry powder that goes into this recipe. The recipe also needs 3 cups of white vinegar. Once that's in, just give it all a big stir. Now you do usually have to cook it or boil it or simmer it for 20 minutes or about that. And over that time, obviously the frozen tomatoes do defrost even more so, and the whole idea is then you let it simmer on low for about an hour and a half, and it should become a bit more of a sauce, a thicker sauce-like consistency. Now I must admit, this is like the 3rd or 4th time I've done this recipe, and it's never done that. I've always found it so difficult to find or reach that thick sauce-like consistency like it mentions in the book. I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but I just never get to that stage. So normally I do stick to the 90 minutes, hour and a half of simmering, and then I take it off. And what I usually do is I usually blitz it to get that sauce consistency, but this time I actually let it go a little bit longer. I'm always cautious with letting tomatoes go a little bit too long because it might turn a bit too acidic, but I ended up leaving it on even lower for about another hour or so. It came a little bit thicker, but still not the same, so I've just decided to whack it in the blender. So the recipe does say, after simmering it on a lower temp for about an hour and a half to sieve it or strain it, and then whacking it back in the pot for another 5-10 minutes, actually boiling it for that time. But obviously I don't do that part, I don't do that stage, I just whack it in the blender. Now I do blitz it well enough to reduce the chunks quite a fair bit, So it is more like a sauce consistency. Now this one didn't turn out too bad. It's probably slightly thicker than what it has turned out in the past. Whether or not I'm then supposed to put it back in the pot like the recipe originally says and boiling it for another 5, 10, whatever minutes. Obviously I didn't do that part. I just went straight to bottling it. Now I pulled these sauce bottles straight out of the dishwasher, so they have been sterilized and they're still quite warm. These sauce bottles I actually purchased from Fowler's a little bit of time ago now. I have a feeling, I don't know if they sell them anymore. I tried having a look. I think they might be around the 250ml mark. But look, you can also just use what other bottles that you've collected over the period of time, which is reuse what you have. I'm using a little funnel here to funnel it in so I don't get it messy on the outsides. But I'm pretty sure they're about 250 mils, but obviously just use what you have. Just be mindful, like it is tomato sauce, so depending on how much you use and how what the jar looks like, it is easier having a slightly narrower top or part of the bottle, just for ease of pouring, but just use what you've got. Now we'll have to blitz the sauce in batches. So this batch did about 2.5 bottles. Now I'm just going to quickly cap these before moving on to the next bit of blitzing. The good thing about this recipe, you can cap them and then you briefly invert them, and that helps with sealing the jar or the bottle itself. You don't actually have to water bath it. So this is the second batch that I'm doing. I end up doing about 2 or 3 batches, and I end up making about 8 bottles in total. Now here I am finishing the last one. I'm just giving them a quick wipe of vinegar and then sealing and inverting this one. But look at that, it's a beautiful color. Like I said, I didn't end up straining any of the ingredients. I just blitzed it all, so it's all in there. The onion, the apple, etc., the tomatoes. And then I obviously had to do a quick taste test. I forgot to do a taste test, and it is bomb. So there we have it, everyone. That's our 3 recipes. So the 2 from the book Freeze Fresh from Schmidt is the Italian-inspired marinara sauce and the pizza sauce. So Italian-inspired marinara sauce, I think made about 3 liters. This is actually our second batch of pizza sauce. I really love it. And the first batch that we made on this video, we actually used all that night. So I had none left. The pizza sauce actually was enough for 12 pizzas, large and small, but still quite a lot of volume for the amount of pizzas that we made that night, because we kept some for the next day, etc. But it was enough to make 12. So if you needed to make any bigger batches of these, obviously you would just amend the recipe. But yeah, it was surprisingly enough for how many pieces we made. It's super easy to do. So this is our second batch. I probably left the tomatoes cooking a little bit too long this time. I actually forgot about them. I forgot about my timer. But it still tastes really amazing. The Sally Wise Complete Preserves book, this is where I got her winter tomato sauce from, the recipe, and it's amazing. So she does 2. I've only really tried the one because I've loved it so much. I've just kept going with it. It has a really nice kick. I had to make a few modifications to this one because I just can't seem to get right the way the book has really explains how to do the recipe, particularly when it comes to the whole thickening scenario. But we made about 8 bottles of these, so I've already started giving these away to family and friends to share the harvest. But all up, we've harvested about 20 kilos so far this season, maybe a bit more. And there's loads more on the way. So we've done these 3 recipes. I've also put a lot of tomatoes in our cooking already, as well as on salads and sandwiches and stuff. So really keen to see how much more I get and what I can do with our tomatoes, our tomato harvest and preserving them. I would like to maybe try and dehydrate some in our dehydrator, but I'm really keen for more recipes. So hit me in the comments below. What's your favorite way to preserve your tomatoes? I'd love to know what else I can do with the future crop of our tomatoes. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please like and subscribe to our channel. I really appreciate it. We also have an Instagram account. It's called the Suburban Homestead AUS. We post a bit more daily updates and progress there, so be sure to follow us along there as well. That would be great. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.